the gentle slope of Patriots Park, usually a place of tranquil repose for Marcus. McDonovan suddenly tilted into a terrifying, sickening descent. One moment he was enjoying the warm May afternoon, the scent of freshly cut grass, a balm to his senses, his wheelchair, positioned perfectly to catch the dappled sunlight under the broad oak he favored. The next, a jarring impact, a sharp metallic click as his brake lever was violently disengaged, and then the world became a dizzying blur of green and blue as the chair untethered careened down the steep incline towards the jagged rocks bordering Willow Creek. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Mac's customary stoicism. His one good hand scrabbled for purchase for a brake that was no longer engaged, his knuckles scraping against the spinning wheel. The other hand instinctively went to protect his head. He was a man who had faced down enemy fire in the jungles of a forgotten war, a man who had learned to live with half his body irrevocably altered by that conflict. But this sudden, senseless assault, this utter loss of control, was a unique kind of terror. A shrill, triumphant voice seemed to pursue him down the hill, thin and sharp as a shard of glass. "This area is reserved for the HOA Spring Fling. You were asked to move, Mr. Donovan." Some people are just so inconsiderate. The voice belonged to Ms. Brenda Snodgrass, president of the Patriots Landing Homeowners Association, a woman whose perfectly manicured exterior concealed a will of iron and a startling capacity for petty cruelty. She now stood at the crest of the slope, a picnic table half unfolded beside her, her hands on her hips, watching Mac's chaotic descent with an expression not of horror, but of grim satisfaction, as if she had just successfully swatted an annoying insect. Maya Ramirez, Mac's niece, arrived at the park entrance just as the scene exploded into terrifying motion. She saw her uncle's wheelchair, a familiar silhouette, suddenly lurch and then accelerate a runaway trajectory towards the creek. Her heart leaped into her throat. Dropping the bag of groceries she'd brought for Mac, she sprinted across the grass, her mind struggling to process the impossible. Mac, her fiercely independent, proud uncle, a decorated veteran, reduced to a helpless projectile. "Uncle Mac!" She screamed, her voice hoarse with adrenaline and fear. She reached the bottom of the slope just as the wheelchair, its momentum finally broken by a patch of thick, muddy ground, a mere foot from the treacherous rocks, tipped precariously, throwing Mac onto the damp earth. He lay there, stunned and gasping, his face pale, his prosthetic leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Maya knelt beside him, her hands automatically checking for injuries, her training kicking in. "Mac, are you okay? Talk to me. Where does it hurt?" He groaned, his eyes fluttering open, focusing on her with difficulty. Maya, that woman, she kicked the brake. Above them on the crest, Brenda Snodgrass was now attempting to direct two hapless-looking HOA volunteers who were struggling with the aforementioned picnic table. She seemed entirely oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the life-altering event she had just precipitated. Maya's gaze icy, with a rage so profound it was almost preternatural, fixed on Brenda. Every instinct, every fiber of her being, honed by years as a special agent for the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General, an arm of the government dedicated to protecting veterans from harm, fraud, and abuse, screamed for immediate decisive action. Brenda Snodgrass had just assaulted a disabled veteran. She had just kicked a hornet's nest. And she had absolutely no idea of the storm that was about to break over her perfectly coiffed head. Maya's visits to her Uncle Mac were a cherished ritual, a grounding point in her often turbulent life. As a special agent with the VA OIG, her days were usually consumed by complex investigations into fraud within VA healthcare contracts, abuses in veterans benefit programs, or even criminal acts committed against vulnerable former service members. It was demanding, often disheartening work, navigating labyrinthine bureaucracies and confronting the darker aspects of human nature. Mac, with his dry wit, his uncomplaining resilience, and his encyclopedic knowledge of baseball history, was her anchor, a reminder of the integrity and quiet heroism she fought to protect. Marcus Mac Donovan had served 2 tours in Vietnam, an infantryman whose bravery had earned him a Silver Star, but had cost him his left leg just above the knee. He rarely spoke of the war, but its legacy was etched into the lines on his face and the quiet dignity with which he bore his disability. After retiring from a civilian career as a librarian, he'd chosen to settle in Patriots Landing, a sprawling development marketed with no small degree of irony as a haven for those who've served and cherish American values. He'd hoped for peace, for camaraderie with fellow veterans, for a place where he could tend his small tomato garden and read his history books in quiet contentment. His neat, modest bungalow was his castle, adapted for his needs with quiet efficiency. Maya often stayed with him for a week or two at a time, a working vacation where she could catch up on paperwork in his sunny spare room while also ensuring he was managing well. He was fiercely independent, sometimes stubbornly so, but she worried about him living alone, even in a community that was supposed to be supportive. Patriots Landing. HOA, however, was less a supportive entity and more the personal fiefdom of its long-standing president, Ms. Brenda Snodgrass. A woman of indeterminate age with a ramrod posture and an unshakable belief in her own infallibility, Brenda ruled the community with a velvet glove lined with finely sharpened steel. Her newsletters, Brenda's Beacon, were legendary for their nitpicking directives on everything from lawn ornamentation minimalist, tasteful, and pre-approved, to the precise shade of beige permitted for exterior window trim. She was, Mac had once dryly remarked to Maya, the sort of person who'd issue a citation for disorderly conduct to a flock of migrating geese. The first overt clash between Mac and Brenda, the incident that had laid the foundation for the later more violent confrontation, had occurred about a month prior to the wheelchair assault. Mac, like many veterans, displayed a small, impeccably maintained American flag on a modest flagpole attached to his front porch. He also flew the POWMIA flag beneath it, a solemn tribute to comrades lost and unaccounted for. One Tuesday morning, Brenda Snodgrass had appeared on his doorstep clipboard, in hand her expression one of pained forbearance. Mr. Donovan, she'd begun her voice, a carefully modulated blend of politeness and reproof. I'm afraid we have a slight issue with your exterior flag display. Mac, who had been enjoying his morning coffee in the sports section, had looked up, his eyebrows raised. An issue, Miss Snodgrass, with Old Glory and the POW flag. That's a new one, even for Patriots Landing. It is not the nature of the flags themselves, Mr. Donovan Brenda had replied, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured fingernail. It is the quantity and the unapproved secondary flag. The HOA board has recently ratified a new guideline, Section 7, Subsection D, regarding outdoor patriotic displays. To maintain aesthetic uniformity and prevent visual clutter, residents are now permitted one single HOA-approved flagpole displaying only the American flag of dimensions, not to exceed 3 feet by 5 feet. Your additional flag, and indeed the slightly non-regulation height of your primary pole, are regrettably in violation. Mac had stared at her, a slow flush rising from his collar. Aesthetic uniformity, visual clutter, Ms. Snodgrass. I flew that flag, the American flag, in places where aesthetic uniformity meant a body bag. And the POWMIA flag is a sacred emblem, a promise not to forget. It stays. Brenda's lips had thinned. Mr. Donovan, your past service, while undoubtedly commendable, does not grant you special privileges or an exemption from community bylaws. The rules apply to everyone equally. Some people seem to think their history entitles them to flout the regulations that ensure Patriots Landing remains a premier residential community. Her implication had been clear and deeply offensive. My history. Miss Snodgrass Mac had said, his voice low and dangerous, entitles me to honor my country and my fallen brothers in any damn way I see fit on my own property, especially when those flags are displayed with the utmost respect. You and your board can take your Section 7 Subsection D and file it where the sun doesn't shine. The confrontation had ended with Brenda issuing a formal written warning, threatening fines and further HOA action if the non-compliant display was not rectified within 7 days. Mac, of course, had not removed the flags. He'd even added a small, respectful Marine Corps emblem beneath them, a quiet act of defiance. Brenda had seethed, and several more threatening letters had followed, but she hadn't as yet escalated to fines, perhaps sensing that taking on a decorated disabled veteran over the American flag was a public relations minefield, even for her. But the incident had clearly established her animosity towards Mac, her resentment of his quiet defiance, and her willingness to use the HOA rulebook as a weapon. Now, kneeling beside her uncle on the muddy bank of Willow Creek, the echo of Brenda's shrill voice still hanging in the air. Maya understood that this wasn't just a random act of impatience. This was an escalation, a vicious personal attack born of that festering resentment. Mac was groaning, trying to sit up. His face was scraped, and there was a growing stain of blood on his trousers near the knee of his good leg. His prosthetic had indeed been twisted, the complex joint mechanism likely damaged. The wheelchair itself was a wreck, one wheel bent at an impossible angle, the frame dented. "Don't move too much," Uncle Mac, Maya said, her voice gentle but firm. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying. "First, 911. I need an ambulance and police assistance at Patriots Park Willow Creek entrance. An elderly disabled man has been assaulted. His wheelchair pushed down a steep embankment. He is injured." She gave the dispatcher the precise location, her voice a model of calm professionalism, despite the tremor of rage that shook her. Then her eyes still fixed on Brenda Snodgrass, who was now looking down at them with an expression that mingled annoyance with a dawning, belated flicker of apprehension. Maya began to document. She switched her phone to camera mode, taking rapid, clear photos of Mac, his injuries, the damaged wheelchair, the slope, and Brenda Snodgrass standing at the top with her picnic table. Every image was a piece of evidence. Maya shouted up the hill, her voice now cracking like a whip. "Stay right there. Don't you move." Brenda drew herself up. "I am the president of this homeowners association, young woman. I will not be ordered about." Mr. Donovan was obstructing a designated event area. He refused a polite request to relocate. I merely encouraged his chair to move a few feet to clear the space for the community picnic table. Encouraged it. Maya echoed, her voice dripping with scorn. You deliberately disengaged his brake and shoved him down a 70-foot slope towards a rocky creek. He could have been killed. That's not encouragement. Ms. Snodgrass, that's assault with a deadly weapon, his own wheelchair, and reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult. The HOA volunteers with the picnic table had frozen their eyes wide, looking from Brenda to Maya in the scene below. A few other parkgoers, drawn by the commotion, were beginning to gather at a safe distance, their faces etched with shock and concern. One of them, a young woman with a stroller, stepped forward hesitantly. I saw part of it. She was yelling at him to move. He said he was fine where he was. Then she definitely pushed his chair. Hard. Another witness, an older man walking a small dog, nodded in agreement. It wasn't no accident. She was angry, shoved it right over the edge. Brenda's face paled slightly under her perfectly applied foundation. This is absurd. They're misinterpreting. I would never intentionally harm anyone. Save it for the police, Ms. Snodgrass. Maya said, her voice like granite. They'll be here momentarily. And trust me, we will be having a very thorough discussion about your definition of intentional harm. The wail of sirens in the distance was a welcome sound. Help was coming for Mac. And for Brenda Snodgrass, Maya vowed silently, a reckoning was approaching far more serious than any HOA bylaw violation she had ever dished out. She was a federal agent, sworn to protect veterans. This was not just an attack on her beloved uncle. It was an attack on everything she stood for. And Brenda Snodgrass was about to learn that some rules, the laws of the land protecting the vulnerable, were not so easily bent to her will. The arrival of local law enforcement in the form of a single patrol car, driven by a young, rather harried-looking Officer Miller, did little to immediately assuage Maya's fury or her concerns for due process. Officer Miller faced with a distraught victim, a belligerent HOA president. A gathering of agitated witnesses and a highly charged atmosphere seemed overwhelmed. He listened first to Brenda Snodgrass, who, having regained some of her composure, launched into a self-righteous tirade about Mr. Donovan's chronic uncooperativeness, his deliberate obstruction of a sanctioned HOA event, and her minimal necessary action to clear the designated picnic area. She painted herself as the beleaguered community leader, merely trying to enforce reasonable rules for the benefit of all residents, only to be met with defiance and now these outrageous, slanderous accusations. She even hinted that Mr. Donovan might have allowed his chair to roll as a way to cause trouble or seek attention. Officer Miller, visibly out of his depth, then took a cursory statement from Mac, who, though in considerable pain and disoriented, clearly articulated that Brenda had approached him aggressively, demanded he move, and then, when he'd calmly refused, had physically disengaged his wheelchair brake and pushed him. Maya, after ensuring the paramedics were tending to Mac, who had a nasty gash on his forearm, a sprained wrist, and was complaining of severe pain in his hip and shoulder, stepped in to speak with Officer Miller. She presented her observations calmly and concisely, detailing Brenda's actions as witnessed by herself and others, the dangerous nature of the slope, and the severity of Mac's potential injuries. Officer Maya said, keeping her voice level, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her, this was not an accident, nor was it a minor altercation. This was a deliberate act of violence against a disabled elderly veteran. I expect Ms. Snodgrass to be charged with at a minimum assault and reckless endangerment, and I want a thorough investigation including statements from all available witnesses. Officer Miller ran a hand through his already tousled hair. Ma'am, I understand you're upset. Your uncle, it looks like he took a nasty tumble. But Ms. Snodgrass here, she's the HOA president. She says he was blocking an event. Sometimes these neighborhood disputes, they get heated. Are you sure she intentionally pushed him to cause harm? Maybe she just bumped the chair, didn't realize the brake was off, or how steep the hill was. He sounded like he was already looking for the simplest, least complicated explanation. Maya's eyes narrowed. Officer Miller, are you suggesting my uncle, a man who has navigated life with one leg for over 50 years and is intimately familiar with the operation of his own custom-fitted wheelchair, simply allowed it to roll? Or that Ms. Snodgrass, who has lived in this community and presumably knows its terrain, didn't realize the steepness of that 70-foot slope leading directly to a rocky creek bed? Her voice was laced with an irony so sharp it could have cut glass. I am telling you as a direct witness, and as will be corroborated by others, that she deliberately and forcefully propelled his wheelchair down that hill after a verbal altercation in which he refused to cede his spot to her picnic table. Her actions were intentional, they were reckless, and they resulted in significant injury. She did not, at this point, reveal her federal credentials. It was a calculated decision. She wanted to see how the local system would handle such an incident on its own merits without the immediate weight of federal involvement. But Officer Miller's apparent inclination to downplay the severity of the assault was a worrying sign. Reluctantly, after more witness statements were taken, including from the young mother with the stroller, Mrs. Chang, who had indeed caught the heated verbal exchange and the initial shove on her phone's camera, and the older gentleman, Mr. Henderson, who confirmed Brenda's aggressive demeanor, Officer Miller agreed to file a report detailing an assault. He did not, however, arrest Brenda Snodgrass on the scene, citing the need for further investigation and consultation with the DA's office, given the conflicting accounts. A statement that made Maya's blood boil, as the accounts of the actual push were not conflicting at all, only Brenda's self-serving justifications. Brenda was merely issued a summons to appear at the precinct for further questioning. Mac was transported to the local hospital. Maya followed the ambulance, her mind a whirl of anger, concern, and strategic planning. The initial medical assessment was grim: a fractured wrist, severe bruising to his hip and shoulder, multiple lacerations, and potential damage to the sensitive components of his prosthetic leg. He would need X-rays, possibly surgery for the wrist, and a lengthy, painful recovery. His already compromised mobility would be further diminished for weeks, if not months. The emotional toll the violation of his independence and dignity was incalculable. While Mac was being treated, Maya began making calls. First to her supervisor at the VA OIG Special Agent in Charge Davies, briefing him on the situation. While this was primarily a local criminal matter at this stage, the victim was a disabled veteran, and the perpetrator's actions were egregious. SAC Davies listened intently, expressed his concern for Mac, and assured Maya of the agency's full support if any aspect of the case touched upon federal jurisdiction or VA programs. He also authorized her to take emergency leave to care for her uncle and manage the situation. Next, she called a trusted legal contact, a former prosecutor named Ben Carter, who specialized in elder abuse and assault cases, to get his preliminary take on the situation and potential legal avenues. Ben was appalled by the details and confirmed that based on Maya's account, felony assault charges were certainly warranted. Brenda Snodgrass, meanwhile, was not idle. Within 24 hours, the Patriots Landing HOA, under her direction, issued an official community safety alert via email and posted notices on community bulletin boards. The alert, couched in officious self-exculpatory language, described a regrettable incident in Patriots Park, where a resident, after refusing repeated requests to clear a designated area for a scheduled community event, unfortunately lost control of his personal mobility device, resulting in a minor fall. It went on to state that for the safety of all residents and to ensure the orderly conduct of community activities, the HOA board is reviewing protocols for common area usage, and reminded residents that failure to comply with directives from HOA officials or designated event coordinators may result in fines or suspension of privileges. It was a blatant attempt to rewrite the narrative to paint Mac as the responsible party and to intimidate any other residents who might dare to question Brenda's authority. To add insult to injury, a formal letter from the HOA's legal counsel arrived at Mac's hospital room 2 days later. It accused Marcus Donovan of creating a public nuisance, willfully obstructing a sanctioned HOA event, and making false and inflammatory accusations against HOA President Brenda Snodgrass. It demanded a written apology from Mac, a retraction of his statements to the police, and reserved the HOA's right to pursue all available legal remedies, including civil action for damages to community property, the allegedly damaged picnic table, and defamation of character. The unmitigated gall of that woman. Mac rasped from his hospital bed, his face pale, but his eyes blazing with a familiar fire. His arm was in a cast, his hip throbbing despite the pain medication. She nearly kills me, and now she wants an apology and damages for her precious table. She's trying to bully us into silence, Uncle Macmaya said, her voice tight. It's a classic abuser tactic. Blame the victim, intimidate, escalate. She's underestimating us. The first phase of Brenda's counterattack was a campaign of isolation and vilification against Mac. She convened an emergency closed-door meeting of her loyal HOA board members, the Patriots' pals, as Mac derisively called them, a trio of sycophants who rubber-stamped her every decision. Following this meeting, new emergency resolutions were passed. Citing ongoing safety concerns and recent disruptive incidents, Marcus Donovan's access to all HOA common facilities, the clubhouse, the swimming pool, even the small community garden plot where he painstakingly grew his prize-winning tomatoes, was temporarily suspended pending a full review by the Safety and Compliance Committee, a committee chaired naturally by Brenda Snodgrass. Notices to this effect were posted, and a letter formally informing Mac of his suspension of privileges was delivered, adding another layer of insult to his injuries. Brenda also began a whispering campaign, spreading rumors through her network of allies that Mac was mentally unstable, prone to aggressive outbursts, and had a history of being difficult and uncooperative. She implied he was a disgruntled troublemaker, looking for a payout. The intimidation tactics soon extended to Maya. One morning, she found the tires of her rental car parked in Mac's driveway slashed, all 4 of them. There was no note, just the silent, vicious message. She reported it to the police, but without witnesses, there was little they could do beyond documenting the vandalism. It was clearly a warning, a crude attempt to scare her off. It had the opposite effect, only hardening her resolve. This is getting serious. Maya Mac said, his voice heavy with worry when she told him about the tires. This woman, she's unhinged. Maybe you should just focus on getting me out of here once I'm discharged. We can sell the house, move somewhere else. It's not worth you getting hurt. No, Uncle Macmaya said firmly, taking his good hand. We are not running. We are not letting her win. She attacked you. She broke the law. She is trying to intimidate a federal agent, even if she doesn't know it yet. That's a very poor life choice on her part. This isn't just about you and her anymore. This is about principle. And I have a few more cards to play. A small ray of hope emerged from an unexpected source. Mr. Arthur Jenkins, an elderly resident whom Maya vaguely recognized from seeing him meticulously tending his small rose garden, approached her hesitantly one afternoon during hospital visiting hours. He was a small, stooped man, a Korean War veteran, his face a roadmap of quiet sorrow and resilience. Ms. Ramirez, he whispered, clutching a worn canvas satchel. I heard about what happened to Marcus. And about your car. It's an outrage. Maya invited him to sit. He perched nervously on the edge of the visitor's chair. Brenda Snodgrass, he said, his voice barely audible. She's a bully. Has been for years. Most of us are too scared to say anything. She targets people, especially if they question her or if she just takes a dislike to them. Mr. Jenkins then recounted his own experiences. Brenda had fined him repeatedly for the supposedly non-compliant height of his meticulously trimmed hedges. She had tried to force him to remove a small, tasteful memorial bench he'd placed under a tree in his yard in memory of his late wife, calling it unauthorized common area encroachment, even though it was clearly on his property. He, too, was a veteran, and he felt Brenda had a particular disdain for older residents, especially those who, like Mac, weren't easily intimidated. He opened his satchel and pulled out a collection of old HOA newsletters, meeting minutes that Brenda had tried to suppress, and copies of angry letters he'd received from her. "I started keeping things," he said. "After what she did with Mary's bench. There are others she's harassed. Old Mrs. Henderson, whose caregiver she tried to ban from using the community pool. The Peterson family, whose son has autism. She complained constantly about the noise he made. And the money Ms. Ramirez. The way she spends HOA funds. Always the most expensive contractors. Always her friends. Never any proper bids for big projects." He pushed a sheaf of papers towards Maya. "I don't know if this is helpful, but she needs to be stopped. What she did to Marcus, it's gone too far." Maya looked through the documents. They painted a clear picture of a pattern of harassment, abuse of power, and potential financial mismanagement. It was invaluable. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her voice filled with gratitude, "this is incredibly helpful and incredibly brave of you. Thank you." "Marcus is a good man," Mr. Jenkins said, his eyes misty. "A fellow soldier. We have to look out for our own." The Chang family, the young couple who lived near the park and whose quick thinking with their phone camera had captured part of the incident, also reached out. Initially intimidated by Brenda's public statements and the HOA's legal threats, they had been bolstered by Maya's quiet determination and Mr. Jenkins's courage. They met Maya discreetly and provided her with the video footage. While it didn't capture the exact moment of the push down the slope, Mrs. Chang had been momentarily distracted by her toddler. It clearly showed Brenda Snodgrass's aggressive and agitated demeanor in the moments leading up to it, her finger jabbing towards Mac, her voice raised, while Mac remained seated calm and non-provocative. It powerfully contradicted Brenda's narrative that Mac had been the aggressor or had somehow caused his own fall. Armed with Mr. Jenkins's documents, the Chang's video, and her own meticulous notes, Maya felt the tide was beginning to turn. She requested a meeting with Detective Washington, a more senior investigator who she'd learned had taken over the case from the overwhelmed Officer Miller due to its escalating complexity and the severity of Mac's injuries. Detective Washington was a stark contrast to Miller. He was a tall, imposing African-American man in his late 40s, his gaze sharp and discerning, his demeanor professional and no-nonsense. He listened intently as Maya laid out the new evidence, the pattern of harassment documented by Mr. Jenkins, the video footage from the Changs, the slashed tires, the HOA's retaliatory actions against Mac. "This is disturbing, Ms. Ramirez." Detective Washington said, his brow furrowed. "This paints a very different picture than a simple neighborhood squabble gone wrong. This suggests a deliberate, malicious course of conduct by Ms. Snodgrass." Maya took a deep breath. It was time. "Detective Washington," she said, "there's something else you need to know about me which may have bearing on how we proceed, particularly concerning Mrs. Snodgrass's actions against my uncle, a disabled veteran." She paused, then met his gaze directly. "I am Special Agent Maya Ramirez with the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. My professional mandate is to investigate crimes and abuses targeting veterans and VA programs." Detective Washington's expression didn't change, but Maya saw a new level of attention, a subtle shift in his posture. He nodded slowly. "VA, OIG. I'm familiar with your agency's work, so this isn't just personal for you, it's also professional. My uncle's assault is deeply personal," Detective Maya clarified. "But Ms. Snodgrass's actions, particularly if they constitute a pattern of targeting or discriminating against veterans or misusing community resources in a way that harms them, could potentially intersect with federal statutes my agency helps enforce. For example, if Patriots Landing has ever received any VA grants or certifications, perhaps for being a veteran-friendly or accessible community, and those representations are found to be false due to Ms. Snodgrass's conduct that could constitute fraud against the VA. Her assault on a disabled veteran, if proven to be bias-motivated, also has potential federal implications under hate crime laws, although those are often prosecuted at the state level initially." She continued, "I am not here to usurp your investigation, Detective. This is your jurisdiction, but I can offer my agency's resources liaison with federal prosecutors if appropriate and provide expertise on laws and regulations pertaining to veterans' rights and protections. My primary goal is to ensure justice for my uncle and to see that Ms. Snodgrass is held fully accountable for her actions under all applicable laws, state and federal. Detective Washington leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was silent for a long moment, considering. Special Agent Ramirez, he said, finally, a new note of respect in his voice. Your disclosure is significant, and your offer of collaboration is appreciated. This case is already complex. Knowing there's a potential federal nexus and having your expertise available is invaluable. Let's work together on this. Let's get all the facts, build an airtight case, and ensure that Ms. Snodgrass answers for what she's done. The midpoint had been reached. The involvement of a more competent local detective, combined with Maya's revelation of her federal status and the VA OIG's potential interest, dramatically shifted the landscape of the investigation. Brenda Snodgrass was no longer just dealing with a grieving niece and a recalcitrant veteran. She was facing a multi-pronged investigation with serious legal firepower. The carefully constructed facade of Patriot's Landing was about to crack wide open. The official, albeit discreet, inquiry initiated by the VA Office of Inspector General into Patriot's Landing HOA sent ripples of unease through Brenda Snodgrass's carefully cultivated domain. While Maya's direct involvement remained focused on supporting Detective Washington's local investigation into the assault, her colleagues at the OIG began a meticulous review of Patriot's Landing's history, specifically searching for any financial ties to VA programs grants for accessibility modifications that were never completed, or any certifications the community might have fraudulently obtained by misrepresenting itself as particularly veteran-friendly. They also ran Brenda Snodgrass's name through their databases, checking for any prior history of complaints or investigations related to defrauding veterans or abusing VA benefits. Brenda, likely alerted to the deepening official scrutiny by her increasingly nervous legal counsel, reacted with a mixture of panic and defiance. She attempted to stonewall Detective Washington's requests for comprehensive HOA financial records, claiming they were confidential proprietary information. When faced with a subpoena, she produced documents that were suspiciously incomplete, with glaring gaps in accounting for large expenditures on community enhancement projects and consulting fees paid to vaguely described entities. Mr. Jenkins's meticulous notes proved invaluable in cross-referencing these doctored records and highlighting the discrepancies. Brenda also tried to consolidate her power within the HOA, attempting to bully the remaining board members into signing backdated resolutions, approving her past actions and expenditures. Some of the Patriots' pals, however, were beginning to crack under the pressure, terrified of being implicated in what was clearly becoming a serious criminal investigation. One board member, the treasurer, a man named Harold Stimson, who had long harbored private doubts about Brenda's financial stewardship, but had been too cowed to challenge her, secretly contacted Detective Washington and offered to cooperate in exchange for consideration, providing further damning evidence of Brenda's autocratic control and questionable financial dealings. Meanwhile, Mac's veteran community rallied. His friends from the local VFW Post 305 and the American Legion, learning of the assault and Brenda's subsequent campaign of harassment, were incandescent with rage. They were men and women who had served their country with honor, who understood sacrifice and camaraderie, and the attack on one of their own, particularly a disabled combat veteran, was an affront they would not tolerate. Led by a fiery, no-nonsense VFW commander named Sal DeMarco, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, they organized a peaceful but highly visible demonstration outside the main entrance to Patriot's Landing. Dozens of veterans, many in their service caps and vests, adorned with service ribbons and patches, stood for hours holding signs that read, "Justice for Mac Donovan." "Stop elder abuse. Patriot's Landing. Shame on your HOA, and veterans deserve respect, not assault." The demonstration drew local media attention. Reporters interviewed Sal DeMarco Mac briefly from his recovery facility, his voice weak but resolute, and even tried to get a comment from Brenda Snodgrass, who remained barricaded in her home, refusing to speak. The story of the one-legged veteran assaulted by his HOA president began to spread, painting Patriot's Landing in a deeply unfavorable light and putting immense public pressure on Brenda and the complicit HOA board. The Changs. The young couple who had filmed the altercation found themselves targeted by Brenda with a barrage of frivolous HOA violation notices. Their trash cans left out an hour too long, a child's toy allegedly left on their lawn overnight, the unapproved color of their welcome mat. It was petty harassment clearly intended to intimidate them into silence. But fortified by Maya's support and their own sense of justice, they refused to be cowed. They provided their video footage not only to Maya and Detective Washington, but also, with Maya's careful guidance on privacy, to one of the more reputable local news outlets covering the story. The footage, though not capturing the final push, clearly showed Brenda's aggressive finger-pointing tirade and Mac's calm demeanor powerfully undercutting Brenda's claims that Mac had been the instigator. Mac, despite his injuries and the ongoing pain, found a renewed sense of purpose in the outpouring of support. His hospital room became a command center of sorts, with visits from fellow veterans, calls from reporters vetted by Maya, and strategy sessions with Maya and occasionally Detective Washington. He was determined to see this through not just for himself, but for all veterans who had ever been disrespected or abused. The climax of the local drama was rapidly approaching. Brenda Snodgrass, in a last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation and reassert her control, announced an emergency HOA town hall meeting. The agenda, according to her notice, was to address recent unfortunate events and misrepresentations, reaffirm community values, and discuss measures to protect Patriots Landing from external and internal threats to its harmony and integrity. It was clear to Maya that Brenda intended to use the meeting as a platform to vilify Mac, and herself rally her remaining supporters, and perhaps even try to oust the dissenting board members or push through a vote of confidence in her leadership. The town hall was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the Patriots Landing Community Center auditorium. The local news crews, alerted by Sal DeMarco and the ongoing public interest, were already setting up their cameras outside as residents began to arrive. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Mac discharged from the hospital only a few days prior, but still heavily reliant on a temporary wheelchair. His own was damaged beyond immediate repair and was being held as evidence insisted on attending. He was flanked by Maya, looking every inch the calm professional federal agent in a tailored pantsuit, and by Sal DeMarco and a formidable contingent of over 50 veterans from VFW Post 305 and other local service organizations, their presence a silent, powerful statement of solidarity. Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Chang, and Harold Stimson, the now cooperating HOA treasurer, were also there, part of a growing group of residents determined to reclaim their community. Brenda Snodgrass swept onto the stage dressed in a severe navy blue suit, her expression a carefully crafted mask of aggrieved martyrdom. She launched into a rambling, self-serving speech filled with patriotic platitudes and thinly veiled accusations. She painted herself as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated by disgruntled individuals with personal vendettas and outside agitators, a clear reference to Maya and the veteran groups. She spoke of her years of selfless dedication to Patriots Landing, her tireless efforts to maintain its prestige and property values, and how she was now being crucified for simply trying to enforce reasonable community standards. She never once mentioned the assault on Mac, referring only to the unfortunate incident in the park, which had been grossly distorted. When she finally reluctantly opened the floor for questions, Maya Ramirez was the first to stand. All eyes in the packed auditorium, including the news cameras, focused on her. Ms. Snodgrass. Maya began, her voice calm, clear, and carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. You speak of distortions and vendettas. Let's speak of facts. The fact is, on May 17th, you verbally assaulted and then physically attacked my uncle Marcus Donovan, a 72-year-old one-legged combat veteran, by deliberately disengaging the brake of his wheelchair and forcefully shoving him down a 70-foot embankment, resulting in multiple serious injuries, including a fractured wrist. We have eyewitness testimony to this effect. We have medical reports. And, Ms. Snodgrass, we have this. On a large screen behind the stage, which had been set up for Brenda's planned presentation, a video began to play. It was the Changs' footage. The auditorium was silent as they watched Brenda Snodgrass, her face contorted in anger, jabbing her finger at a seated calm Mac Donovan, her voice, though indistinct, clearly agitated and aggressive. The video ended just before the physical assault, but its impact was devastating, completely shredding Brenda's portrayal of herself as a calm enforcer of rules, dealing with an aggressive resident. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Brenda stared at the screen, her face ashen. Maya continued, her voice relentless. You then orchestrated a campaign of intimidation and harassment against my uncle, revoking his access to community facilities. You oversaw the dissemination of false and defamatory statements about him. You have, according to numerous residents and HOA records now in the possession of law enforcement, a long history of abusing your power, targeting vulnerable individuals, and mismanaging HOA funds for personal benefit and to reward your cronies. She gestured to Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Stimson, who both nodded grimly. This isn't about a vendetta, Ms. Snodgrass. This is about accountability. Brenda, momentarily speechless, finally erupted. This is an outrage slander. These are lies. I will not stand here and be attacked by this interloper, this troublemaker and her veteran goon squad. She pointed a trembling finger at Maya and the assembled veterans. At that precise moment, the main doors of the auditorium opened. Detective Washington entered accompanied by two of Maya's VA OIG colleagues, Special Agent Davies, her SAC, and another field agent, both in official OIG windbreakers. They moved purposefully down the center aisle. A hush fell over the auditorium. Brenda Snodgrass froze, her tirade cut short, her eyes wide with a dawning, uncomprehending terror. Detective Washington addressed her, his voice resonating with quiet authority. Brenda Snodgrass, you are under arrest for violation of state penal code sections pertaining to felony assault on a disabled and elderly individual and reckless endangerment. Then Special Agent Davies stepped forward. Ms. Snodgrass, he said, his tone equally grave. Special Agent Maya Ramirez is, as you now undoubtedly realize, an agent of the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General, based on a separate federal investigation conducted by our office, which has found probable cause of significant financial irregularities, misrepresentation in dealings potentially affecting VA programs, and conspiracy to defraud the members of this community, including numerous veterans. I'm also placing you under federal arrest. You have the right to remain silent. As her Miranda rights were read first by Detective Washington for the state charges, then by Agent Davies for the federal charges, Brenda Snodgrass, the self-proclaimed Queen of Patriots Landing, visibly crumbled. Her mask of indignation shattered, revealing the frightened, malevolent bully underneath. The click of handcuffs seemed to echo through the stunned silence of the auditorium. Her reign of petty tyranny, built on intimidation and deceit, was over, brought crashing down by the courage of an old soldier, the tenacity of his niece, and the united front of a community finally finding its voice. The arrest of Brenda Snodgrass at the televised town hall meeting sent shockwaves not just through Patriots Landing, but across the wider local community. The dual arrests on serious state and federal charges underscored the gravity of her offenses. Her carefully constructed world of petty rules and absolute authority dissolved as she was led away, her face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. In the immediate aftermath, the Patriots Landing HOA was thrown into chaos. Most of Brenda's Patriots pals on the board resigned in disgrace, terrified of being implicated in her crimes. An emergency interim board was quickly formed with Mr. Arthur Jenkins, his quiet courage, now widely recognized, stepping up as interim president. He was joined by Mrs. Chang Harold Stimson, the former treasurer, now a key cooperating witness, and Sal DeMarco, the VFW commander, who agreed to serve as a community liaison, particularly for veteran affairs. Their first task was to cooperate fully with both state and federal investigations, opening all remaining HOA books and records. The forensic accounting undertaken by the VA OIG and the local DA's office began to uncover the full extent of Brenda's financial malfeasance, years of embezzled funds kickbacks from favored contractors, and HOA money spent on her personal luxuries and legal fees to harass residents. It was a sordid tale of greed and abuse of power. For McDonovan, the journey to recovery was long and arduous. His fractured wrist required surgery, and the injuries to his hip and shoulder necessitated months of painful physical therapy. His beloved custom wheelchair was damaged beyond repair, a constant reminder of the assault, though it was also a crucial piece of evidence. But through it all, his spirits were buoyed by the immense outpouring of support he received. His veteran buddies were constant visitors, offering encouragement and practical help. Neighbors he barely knew stopped by with food cards and offers to tend his tomato garden. Patriots Landing, freed from Brenda's oppressive rule, began to show its true colors, those of a caring, compassionate community. Maya stayed with Mac for several weeks, juggling her remote work for VA OIG, with caring for him and coordinating with Detective Washington and her OIG colleagues on the ongoing investigations. She was a constant source of strength and reassurance for her uncle, her professional expertise invaluable in navigating the complex legal processes. The legal case against Brenda Snodgrass moved forward on two fronts. The state charges for assault and reckless endangerment were strong, buttressed by eyewitness testimony, the Chang's video, and Mac's compelling victim statement. The federal charges focusing on wire fraud conspiracy and potentially program fraud related to misrepresentations made to secure VA-related benefits or certifications for the community were more complex, but equally damning thanks to the financial evidence uncovered by Mr. Jenkins, Mr. Stimson, and the OIG auditors. Faced with an avalanche of evidence and the prospect of multiple lengthy trials and severe penalties, Brenda's high-priced legal team eventually advised her to seek a plea agreement. After months of negotiation, she pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony assault on a disabled person at the state level and 1 count of federal wire fraud. At her sentencing hearing, the courtroom was packed. Mac was there seated in a new state-of-the-art wheelchair, partially funded by a community-led fundraiser with the rest, to be covered by anticipated restitution. He listened intently as the judge delivered a scathing rebuke of Brenda's conduct, calling her actions a shocking betrayal of community trust and a despicable act of violence against a vulnerable individual who served his country with honor. Brenda Snodgrass was sentenced to a total of 5 years in prison, 3 for the federal fraud conviction, to be followed by 2 for the state assault conviction. She was also ordered to pay hefty fines and full restitution to the Patriots Landing HOA for the embezzled funds and a significant sum to Mac Donovan for his medical expenses, the replacement of his wheelchair, and his pain and suffering. Her assets were seized to satisfy these orders, and she was, of course, permanently barred from ever holding a position of authority in any community association or fiduciary role again. Her name became a local byword for arrogance and corruption. With Brenda gone, Patriots Landing began a remarkable transformation. Under the guidance of Mr. Jenkins and the new board, the HOA was completely restructured. Transparency, accountability, and genuine resident participation became the new guiding principles. Discriminatory or overly restrictive bylaws were repealed. The community's finances were put on a sound footing. And most importantly, a new spirit of inclusivity and mutual respect began to flourish. The HOA, working with Sal DeMarco and other veteran residents, established new programs to actively support and honor its veteran population. Accessibility throughout the community was significantly improved with new ramps, curb cuts, and reserved parking spaces properly implemented and enforced. The park where Mac had been assaulted was renamed Veterans Valor Park, and the steep slope was regraded and beautifully landscaped with an accessible pathway leading to a new peaceful memorial garden dedicated to all who had served. Mac, though his physical recovery was slow, found a new lease on life. He became an active voice in the reformed Patriots Landing, serving on the new Accessibility and Veterans Affairs Committee. His story and his quiet resilience inspired many. He even started a small support group for disabled veterans in the wider community, sharing his experiences and offering encouragement. Maya eventually returned to her full-time duties as a VA OIG special agent in Washington, D.C. Her commitment to her work further deepened by her personal experience. She knew that while her intervention in Patriots Landing had been driven by love for her uncle, it had also been a profound affirmation of her professional oath to protect those who had protected the nation. A year after Brenda Snodgrass's sentencing, Maya returned to Patriots Landing for the dedication of the new memorial garden in Veterans Valor Park. The sun shone brightly on a community transformed. Mac, looking remarkably well, his eyes twinkling with their old humor, was one of the keynote speakers. He spoke not of his ordeal, but of resilience of community and of the importance of standing up to bullies big or small. As he concluded his speech to heartfelt applause, he caught Maya's eye and gave her a subtle wink. Later, as they walked along the new accessible pathway, admiring the blooming flowers in the garden, Mac squeezed her hand. "You know, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For a while there, I thought the fight was over for me. But you in this community, you showed an old soldier there are still battles worth fighting, and victories worth winning. Thank you." Maya smiled, her heart full. "You were the one who taught me how to fight, Uncle Mac, with courage and integrity." She looked around at the peaceful park, at the diverse group of residents chatting and laughing, at the American flag flying proudly and respectfully, alongside the POW MIA flag at the garden's entrance. The scars of what had happened would remain, but they were now overlaid with the vibrant colors of healing unity and a renewed sense of purpose. Patriots Landing was finally beginning to live up to its name, thanks to the courage of a few good people and the unwavering arm of justice. And Maya Ramirez knew with a quiet certainty that this was a victory that would endure.